Skye Perryman, CEO of Democracy Forward. I am so happy I get a chance to talk to you because I understand you're just fresh from court.
Our
That's
team, yes, we had a virtual hearing with a federal judge here in Washington, who gave the American people a sigh of relief today. The Trump administration was going to freeze funding across the country for essential programs that affect people and communities. Our brave clients went into court earlier this morning. Our wonderful team here at Democracy Forward prepared papers and went in and argued, and the judge is issuing what's called an administrative stay, where people get a bit of a sigh of relief while we get some additional briefing on where she can consider the full case.
so this means that the spending freeze we've all heard about is not actually is not going into effect.
Right. Not today. Not today. And the judge will hear more argument on Monday.
So I want to get to explaining what Democracy Forward is and your background, but because everybody's so anxious about this, can you help us a little bit with what does the order do, if we know? Because I know some Medicaid grant program, Medicaid couldn't access their portal around the country. Nonprofits said they couldn't access their funds. The White House says that's not meant to happen. And it's illegal for them to do this, is it not?
Well, of course. I mean, we think it's illegal, and we believe that the courts are going to find it to be unlawful. It's really a way of governing by chaos and almost, frankly, an adversarial nature. I mean, the clients that we have the privilege of representing, we represent the American Public Health Association, the National Council of Nonprofits, Main Street Alliance, which is a small business, an association of small businesses, and SAGE. And state attorneys general also are going to court on this because of the extreme effects that people across the country will feel. So we're very grateful that the court heard the matter today, gave us more time to continue to get briefings, going to give the government time to get their briefing on file, and administratively stayed, gave everyone a bit of time where the courts can hear this, because we do think that it is unlawful. And more than that, it's just so harmful. And people have been in limbo, really concerned about services, about how they're going to continue to operate essential programs, how they're going to do their jobs. And so this was a good day today.
What is the essence of your argument?
Well, we make several. One is that the whole way this action came about is arbitrary and capricious and unlawful. And our federal laws protect the American people from your government acting in an arbitrary and capricious manner. And so we make those arguments in the papers. We also believe that what they're doing is a violation of the First Amendment. You can't unconstitutionally condition funding on making sure that one has the same viewpoint as you, or picking out various pieces, unconstitutional funding. So that First Amendment argument is another argument that you'll see in the case. There are a range of other concerns about how the administration's operating that you've heard members of Congress talk about, the fact that Congress actually appropriates funds. I mean, there's a range of these considerations people are reading about, but in our case, right now, we're really arguing about the First Amendment, which everyone has a right to, and also our right to be free from arbitrary and capricious government.
And so just staying on this for one moment, we keep hearing about the Impoundment Act and that there's a law that says Congress has the right to control spending, as you said, not the executive. And so this was unlawful. You're not arguing that because you're not representing members of Congress. Is that correct?
Well, we're not in this case, the way it was pled. And of course, everyone is trying to respond very quickly, because this is also an administration that came in and just sought to, with a stroke of a pen, put everyone in chaos. So this has been a fast moving. You see me, I don't have all the makeup that I would normally have on for you. This is a fast moving situation, but the arguments that we made in the complaint today and that we make in our temporary restraining order, our application for temporary restraining order, are really on arbitrary and capricious malicious and unlawful governmental activity and a violation of the First Amendment. There are major concerns, of course, about this administration taking power away from Congress. And when we say that, that means they're seeking to take power away from the people, because the power of the purse and that legislative power really does reside with Congress. And so you'll see commentators speak about that over the coming days. I believe these issues will also become litigated in the courts if the administration continues as it has on this last week. And we will, we're happy to talk with you and follow that in future conversations.
So tell us a little bit about Democracy Forward. It's remarkable that your organization was in place and ready to bring these groups together and bring a case instantly, because, as you said, it's complicated. Had you not been there, maybe we wouldn't, there would have been no federal judge to freeze it. I understand that you're working with some 800 lawyers across the country. Just give us a sense. What do you do, and what's the purpose of Democracy Forward?
Well, Democracy Forward is a legal organization, so we have lots of folks on our staff who are lawyers. We also have great communicators and policy experts and so many other folks that come from other fields too. We were founded for such a time as this. We were founded in the wake of the 2016 election. In the early days of 2017, you've talked about this before, we started seeing the first Trump administration take a range of actions that really shocked people. The Muslim ban was one that everyone remembers. And you remember seeing lawyers dropping their bags in airports and running to render aid, just like doctors do. And what was happening behind the scenes was that the administration was actually engaged in a range of other conduct that was really harmful to people and communities and people's everyday lives, that wasn't really getting all that attention, the shock and awe attention that some of the other actions were getting. And it also wasn't getting the legal attention. So some examples, this is going to ring true, were things like abruptly cutting off federal funding to community programs, things that we really hadn't seen as much before. And so I think that there wasn't as many people paying attention to it. So Democracy Forward was really founded out of a need to make sure we had some of the best lawyers in the country take up the client of the American people and of democracy. We brought a range of cases against the prior administration. We always hope that the government will work for the people. And when it does, you will not see us in court, but it didn't in many instances. And so we brought a range of cases across issues and really won victories for people and communities, from voting rights to healthcare access to climate policies to public education, all the things that many of, I know, your listeners care about. And so then it was like, well, the Trump administration's over. Maybe this threat is over and everybody can go back to their lives. And we saw on January 6th that was not the case, that these threats to democracy and to people and communities were not momentary. This is part of a really concerning movement that's abreast in the country at the time. And so in 2021, Democracy Forward we started scaling our work. We actually got bigger, not smaller, doing work in the states and local communities. We represent teachers and librarians who are facing book bans, parents and students. And really all seeking to come together to build a bold and vibrant democracy for all people. And now we have our work cut out for us. So we started planning last year about what would happen if the president of the United States was someone who was not interested in the common good, was not interested in governing for all people, but interested really more in private interest or in a particular, narrow ideological agenda. And unfortunately, that's where we are. And so we're ready to go. And you saw that today in court on the inauguration day. We filed a case. We filed a case yesterday to try to prevent ICE from coming into houses of worship, which is really concerning to people across the country, people of all different beliefs and all different ideologies. So that's the kind of work we do.
Let's take whatever time we have, because I know you're probably under the gun, to go through some of the cases.
Yeah.
I'd love to start with the inspectors general, actually. So Trump his administration fired anywhere from 12 to 17 inspectors general. I think there's a freeze on communications from the agencies. They can't speak to the public. So it's hard to know the actual breadth of this action. But for folks who don't know, the inspectors general are watchdogs who investigate our own agencies for waste, fraud, and abuse. They are responsible for draining the swamp. Also, it's illegal and Congress has done nothing. Firing them without notice to Congress is illegal. What can or have you all done?
Well, we are in touch with people. We're very concerned. We are considering legal options that are available, as are many. I think you'll see some. I think you'll see some, news on that in the coming days potentially. Today, I do think, and we were in court, and so I didn't see. I haven't read the full scope, but maybe by the time this is out to your listeners, I think today there was a letter that was sent to President Trump from members of Congress scolding him and saying that this is a travesty, the way that he's operating outside the bounds of the law. And I believe the White House has rebuffed that. So this is very concerning. For what it really means is that you have someone, the president does get to choose certain positions. President can fire certain people. I mean, that's part of what happens in government. But this is quite unprecedented because the president is really not operating within the bounds of the law that Congress set. And again, we care about Congress, but we should really care about ourselves and about our communities. And whenever the president oversteps into Congress's domain, that really is a threat to the people because Congress represents the people in so many ways.
Okay, so we'll stay tuned on that. See if there's some legal action too. Let's talk about Doge for a moment. That's Elon Musk's quote efficiency entity. There's so much to say here. One of the things that keeps coming up in my inbox is this unconfirmed report that Doge has literally plugged into a server at the Office of Personnel Management, and that Elon Musk's people and people from Project 2025 are themselves sending out emails to the federal employee workforce as if they are the Office of Personnel Management. It's wild. For anybody who knows government, it's just wild. I'm curious if you know anything about that, if you can subpoena information to find out if that's true and what you're doing. Is Doge legal?
Well, we're on that. The first day when Trump was inaugurated, we filed along with our co-counsel, an organization called Crew. They're a great organization for your listeners to also go check out. A lawsuit against Doge for failing to abide by and against the administration for failing to abide by basic transparency laws. The president does get to have some advisors and listen to people. That's part of what you do when you're a leader. But what you can't do is have private interest influencing and shaping the government, acting as advisors without abiding by basic transparency laws that ensure fair balance and perspectives, that ensure the American people have an opportunity to participate and aren't shut out of their government. And that is what the administration is doing with Doge. So that case is on file. There have been a flurry of cases that have been filed against Doge. I believe that there are likely massive ethical problems with the way that some of these advisors are operating. And so you will see more on that in the coming days. And I think one thing that I like to sort of bring home when we talk about these things is that when we're talking about government transparency and when you're talking about fair balance, that's not an ideological concept. Right? These are like maybe someone agrees or disagrees with a particular healthcare policy or a particular tax policy. That's who we are. We all have different opinions. But these laws that are really in place to make sure that the government is operating for the people, that people know what's going on, even if they don't agree with it or would do it differently, that's fundamental. And what we saw in the last Trump administration, and we're a week in and we're already seeing it now, is a real violation and disregard of that fundamental function of our federal laws and our federal government. And that's really harmful because it means that people aren't able to take part in their government and their future in their communities and in the common good. And so that's really a focus of ours in a lot of ways at Democracy Forward.
It also seems like if this is all true, these individuals are sort of overriding our functions of government to make decisions unilaterally, which is that is there a way to, is that legal? Is that
look, I think that no, it's not. And I think you'll continue to see, you're already seeing legal action taken. I think you're going to continue to see, the administration's not doing that well in the courts. Last time they lost 80% of the time in the courts. This time they've already lost on birthright citizenship and an early lawsuit that came in. You saw this today, a federal judge having to pause what they were seeking to do because it's just so brash and could affect so many people, and there's not even time for the court to look at everything and consider it. So I think that you will continue to see legal action, and courts have to check that. And Congress has a role with this too. Congress can ask questions, Congress can demand more, and we need to see that as well.
Yeah. I have to say, as a person who's
Lawyer,
covered, yeah, Washington for years, I'm shocked at the silence of Congress so far.
Well, and I'll just say, I'm going to tell you what I say to, I've said this weekend, it kind of made a few people mad, but our lawyers, we're working around the clock. You don't see me. I don't have full hair and makeup on today. I mean, we're working around the clock to make sure the American people have a voice and to make sure that when people are seeking to violate your rights, that's not seeking to do something that you may disagree with. We can agree to disagree on some things, but when your rights are violated, or they're seeking to undermine the way our government can work for people, we're going to be there in court. And that's a hustle. And we're going to do it every single day, as are hundreds and thousands of lawyers across the country. We do need our elected leaders to have that hustle too.
Curious, I'll go back to the issues, but I'm curious, big picture. A lot of people have expressed anxiety that even the courts, quote, won't do anything. They think that there's so many Trump appointed judges and that the Supreme Court has shown a certain level of friendliness, shall we say, to the Stop the Steal movement and other things. They don't have faith in our system. Do you?
Well, look, I have faith in the American people. And I know that as hard as things look right now, we remember that we have been through harder times before. And for many people in this country, there has always been a struggle to ensure representation, basic fairness, dignity, and respect. So let's talk about the courts. The Supreme Court, you and I have less rights than we did a few years ago, right? Mm-hmm. My goddaughter has less rights. So the Supreme Court definitely has taken a turn to the right as a result of Donald Trump actually packing the court in the prior administration after congressional Republicans denied President Obama and the American people, President Obama's nominee for Supreme Court at the end of his term. So the court is in a more right-leaning place, and we're seeing that, and it affects our everyday lives. We can have another conversation at some point. There are actually things that Congress can do about that too, but they don't seem that interested in it right now, but we're going to continue to push for that. But the courts overall, our federal court system, just like the court we were in today, right? The courts overall are actually have more pro-democracy, more pro-rule of law judges today than they did on the last day of the last Trump administration. And by some accounts, when you look at the judges and their commitment to the rule of law, how they came to the bench, the courts are even more professionally diverse and stronger from a rule of law perspective than they were even on the first day of the last Trump administration. And so what that means is that the courts remain a hugely important front line in this battle for democracy. I can't tell you that every single case before every single judge or before every single court is going to be decided the way one would like it to be decided, or even necessarily fairly in all times. There are certain judges that are very ideological in their way. You see that in some instances at the Supreme Court on some issues. But what we do know is that the courts are providing a really consistent check. You're already seeing this just in this last week, where the checks on Donald Trump and his administration and their violation of the rule of law and their violation of people's rights are coming from the courts. And we need to pay attention to that. And we've also seen the Supreme Court check some of the most extreme behavior as well. I don't want to normalize I do think there's a lot of extremity and judicial extremism coming out of that court, certainly in areas like women's health. But the Supreme Court rejected the independent theory of the state legislature that Donald Trump was seeking to use to deprive the American people of the results of the last election, of the 2020 election. And so I think you are going to see a lot of things going through the courts. And I do believe that the courts can be an important check, but not the only check. And that's where we need everybody to be pushing their members of Congress, doing what they can in their own lives and not just relying on the lawyers. But we're going to have some good days as lawyers too on behalf of people.
Let's talk for a moment about the ICE raids and the lawsuit you've brought around raiding, I think it's churches, or is it? Yes. Tell us about that.
I think this is the thing to pay attention to. And for all people, we don't all, I'm from Texas. We don't, not everybody agrees on every policy at all times, but this is really foundational and we need to pay attention. So for years, for decades in this country, under all kinds of administrations, there was a protection from immigration enforcement activity in sensitive locations, and that includes houses of worship or religious ceremonies, things like weddings or funerals, houses of worship, so that people, all people, can be in these spaces without being intimidated, not just necessarily immigrants, right? But all of us to be able to worship freely and be in locations where there's not this law enforcement activity, unless there were sort of very limited exceptions. And the administration last week, with the stroke of a pen, revoked that policy. And again, I just want to say this is not a policy that was just a policy of a Democratic administration or, just a policy of one person. This has been a long-standing 3 decades policy. And we saw over the weekend reports of ICE going into churches, which is really an invasion of a sacred space. And so we have sued the administration for that on behalf of Quaker communities across the country, who make a range of arguments about how this policy is affecting their fundamental right to worship and be in community with others. So there is a First Amendment claim around freedom of expression and freedom of association and freedom of expression. There is a religious freedom argument in that case. And then
Smart. And the court's very friendly to religious liberty right now. Yeah.
And then there's also that pesky little thing, that law that protects all Americans from arbitrary and capricious government. You don't just come in with a stroke of a pen, change policy that's been in place forever. And then there's a lot of other concerns with the law as well. And so we're really proud of our clients. I mean, these are people of faith stepping up, bringing a case in court. And I think you'll start seeing some movement in that case really quickly. And it's definitely something to watch, and we're happy to keep you guys updated on it.
Right. And briefly, because I want to make sure we can get to some other topics, what are your top line tips to undocumented people? What are their rights?
I think to know your rights, I think, that is always what we say. The ACLU and other organizations have done a phenomenal job of making sure there are know your rights toolkits. We want to make sure that every person, just as a matter of being a person, understands what their rights are. We also want to make sure that people who are legally here are not harmed as a result of arbitrary and callous enforcement actions. And so I think that's an important thing that the media doesn't often cover. But many of the people that are harmed are actually people who are legally in the United States. They are citizens of the United States. And there has to be some accountability for that, as well as accountability for perverting our sacred and religious spaces with this type of law enforcement activity in a very broad brush way.
I mean, we saw there was one, I think it was a Marine vet who had been detained, a citizen, in one of these raids. I mean, it's just, I'm sure there'll be endless stories like that. Let's talk for a moment, if we could, about some of the things that are happening in the just medical healthcare space. And I'm going to ask you if there is legal recourse around. So just some examples are the CDC has been directed to no longer communicate with the World Health Organization. That's how our country learns about outbreaks around the world. It's even how we make the flu vaccine. So that means we are less able to prevent diseases here. NIH grants have been frozen. So researchers who are in the middle of developing things can no longer do the work to get us those life-saving treatments. CDC stopped publishing its morbidity and mortality weekly report that the medical community depends on to keep us healthy and safe. And if there's talk that they could cut off access or government funding for things like vaccines or certain pharma medications. Is there legal recourse if the administration does all these things or for what they've already done?
There is legal recourse, and you will see us in court on a lot of these issues. In the last administration, the administration abruptly cut off grants to teen pregnancy prevention programs, a bipartisan program authorized by Congress that cities and nonprofits and communities and counties across this country relied on. They did it without legal basis. They did it without any type of rational reasoning. And we and other organizations were able to go to court and restore that funding for those communities. This is a tactic that it appears that they use. Again, this is like, and again, just like taking a step back, like a very adversarial tactic. But this is a tactic that they, we appear to see, and that you're already seeing in the early days of this administration, that grants and these grant-related funding, and we may think, well, that doesn't have anything to do with me. I guarantee you it does. All of us are benefiting from some type of essential service that is being funded through the federal public health apparatus and other things. And so that's one of the reasons why we rushed to court, and the team that we have here at Democracy Forward, stayed up overnight with our clients to make sure that we could get into court to get this temporary freeze. And you will definitely see other legal actions should the administration break the law. Other areas, and this is a really important point, we emphasize it a lot. We saw it before. We see it in some states. If you are a political actor that doesn't like to be checked by people, like you don't necessarily like democracy all the time because the people have a way of checking you, but you also don't like facts and evidence because like they have a way of checking you too. And we all know facts and evidence that like we don't like, but you're like, yeah, well, that's the reality, right? And so one thing we saw in the last administration, we sued and won on, we're going to see here again, we see it in other states with far-right leadership, is an attempt to undermine facts and evidence, shutting off communication, saying, don't worry about this data, deleting data, trying to have people not collect data so then you can deny reality. So many of those tactics that it appears as if there's a playbook that they want to use do have legal problems. And then some of them are ones that the American people need to be clear, we will not tolerate. And that's where I think you all come in terms of making sure we're exposing these things and not just the headline issues. I'm so glad you asked this question. It's where people and communities need to come in. It's where our elected leaders need to come in too.
So if people are upset that the CDC can't talk to the WHO, what can they do? Like, can you sue? Can they do something?
We are looking. There's a lot of people upset about that. So I will tell you, I think you're going to see swift legal challenges. One place that your listeners and viewers that tune in can go to understand what's happening is a website that we set up called democracy2025.org. We don't need projects. Not interested in projects, democracy2025.org. You can go online. We set up a legal response center where people at home can see what is happening, how their response is, and guess what? You can sign up. And when you write to us, we don't have AI bots. Like when you write to us, people answer your emails. And so please come. Bring it on, democracy2025.org. You can also get in touch with us at democracyforward.org. And we are hearing and listening to people across the country. There are hundreds of organizations that are committed to making sure that people are protected in this time.
Is that also a place people can send in tips about things that are going on?
Absolutely. We're happy to hear that. And then the other thing, because you mentioned it briefly, is our federal workforce.
Yes.
Sounds very wonky but is super important. We have launched an initiative at Democracy Forward with a lot of other organizations called Civil Service Strong. So civilservicestrong.org. If your listeners are they're civil servants themselves experiencing threats. We had a town hall last night where over 5,000 people joined. We're working to make sure there are resources online and available. We filed a case today. This other case is making the news, but we also filed another case today against Schedule F.
What's that? Because there are a lot of actually federal workers in the audience.
Yeah.
So what is this? Yeah.
Yeah. So federal workers are facing a range of threats from their own president, which is really unfortunate. I just want to say We appreciate everything that our federal workers do for the American people, and we're here to protect you. So there's a number of policies that the administration is seeking to implement. One is Schedule F, where they want to seek to reclassify certain positions so that they can more easily terminate people. They have come in and sought to already put people on administrative leave or just summarily fire people who have done nothing other than be public servants in this country, working for Republican administrations, Democratic administrations, serving the American people. And so we're quickly developing litigation on that. Like I said, we've sued on Schedule F today. There's already been one lawsuit before ours was filed. And then at the same time, we want to make sure that individual civil servants, and if you're listening, have the resources they need to navigate this difficult time. And so on civilservicestrong.org, you will see a lot of those resources. You can sign up for more resources. We're doing town halls. We have amazing people. The head of the Office of Personnel Management, which maybe a few weeks ago people didn't know, but now Trump's made it famous.
I know, right?
The former acting head of the Office of Personnel Management was so concerned about the threats and attacks on the civil service that we saw in Project 2025 that we knew were likely to come, that at 12:01 on Inauguration Day, instead of taking time to go home with his kids or to go on a vacation, which is where a lot of people went, he came to Democracy Forward. Mm-hmm. And he is working with us as the managing director of Civil Service Strong. His name is Rob Shriver. He's great. He brought a little team with him, and he helped lead the town hall yesterday. And we want your listeners and viewers that are civil servants or that are concerned about our civil servants to be sure to plug into that resource. And our team is here to help you. We can't make promises because this is a very problematic situation where the administration is seeking to be an adversary to its own public servants. But what we will promise you is that if there is impact litigation that can be brought, we will bring it. And if there are individual resources and ways we can support you, we will do that. And so that's civilservicestrong.org.
Does he do interviews?
He does.
I would love to interview him.
Great.
So we can follow up with that. Great. And there's news just now that's breaking as we're talking that the Trump administration is offering a buyout to federal workers before they have to stop working from home. So I'm sure there's all sorts of questions around that, which we can follow up with you on.
And yes, and Rob is great about talking about this and really has pointed out, I mean, a lot of these, just like across the country, a lot of these roles don't actually have office-based offices anymore, right? Because It's more efficient for people to work remotely. So I think in our patent office, there's a range of like fully remote positions where there aren't physical spaces. In our cyber force, those are remote jobs. So this is really concerning for those of us that are relying on this system to deliver for us.
Plus, ending work from home is just a way of forcing people to take the buyout, right? It's just a forcing mechanism to reduce the work, the staff, I think.
Yeah, so we can definitely get some resources that. There'll be more on civilservicestrong.org.
Okay, great. I just have two more questions. One is, what happens now with the federal spending freeze lawsuit? They've halted the freeze, so the money should go out. But what's the next step? Where does it go from here?
Well, the next step is on Monday. The judge ordered that on Monday there will be a hearing. There will be some briefing that is exchanged between the parties. We had to move very quickly to get into court to try to protect people. Obviously, we need to, continue to build those resources, and the government will need to be able to fully respond. And so on Monday, you will see that, which will be a hearing on a temporary restraining order, which is what we've asked. And then after Monday, there will be other pieces of that case. If the judge grants the temporary restraining order, the freeze would remain in effect. If the judge does not, you could end up with a lot of chaos and harm. And so we will continue to move swiftly to address that in court, because it's not just one motion and then that's the end of the case. So this is going to be a long journey, but we are committed and we are very pleased with how today went. So
you're going to be working all weekend?
We're going to be working and working. Yeah.
You're going to be working for 4 years straight.
We're going to be working for 4 years. Yes.
I know the feeling. Last thing, if people want to support your work, what's the best way to do that?
Go to democracyforward.org, sign up for our list. We do not spam you. Sign up for our list. donate if you can, because all these lawyers are not free. So donate if you can, and follow our social media channels. You're also welcome to follow me. I keep my social media channels public. You're welcome to follow me. And then we've talked about, if you just want extra information, we have these other two resources, democracy2025.org and civilservicestrong.org. And then you can find it all at democracyforward.org.
Right. Is there anything I haven't asked you that you think we should address?
Here's the one thing I'll say, and I think, we're a week into this, like, what are we, 8 days into this? I think what we know, and we've looked at this at Democracy Forward, and it's important for people, I think, to understand this. In 2021, after January 6th, the United States was added to a global list of backsliding democracies. And it remained on that list every year since because of reversals in civil rights for people that we see, for instance, out of the Supreme Court, because of dysfunction in Congress and our legislatures, because of continued election denialism and misinformation. And we're in that backslide right now. And the work that we want to be on, we're Democracy Forward. The work we want to be on is the work really about our people, families, communities, and our future. And we believe that this is a crisis that can be a catalyst for real change. And that's what we're committed to every day. But what we know about societies that are in this backslide, and what we know about these very far right actors that seek to divide people, how many people said that abortion access was so polarizing? And then you see, in places like Deep Red, Missouri, passing these initiatives, right? People that seek to polarize people when there's really so much more in common, is that they want to isolate you. And isolation is a huge tool of very far right and regressive movements in these backsliding democracies. And so when people ask me what they can do for democracy, first of all, I'm like, pay attention, support us, vote, tell your friends to vote. But one thing we can all do in this time is we can be in community with each other. We can refuse to be isolated. We can, if there's a lot of people around you, you might feel isolated. We can refuse to be isolated. We can say, that community they're picking on, what if that were me? And I'm going to go meet somebody today, and I'm going to feel more connected to them. Or that neighbor across the street that doesn't agree with me, and I got a neighbor that doesn't agree with me, we're going to sit and we're going to have some dinner on the porch. And that sounds trite, but it actually is the thing that I think in this moment can bring us together. And then we can do this hard work together to figure out how we're going to turn this crisis into a catalyst for real change and for a bright and more vibrant future. So that's the one thing I would add. And it's not, it's not a talking point, and it's not a tweet, and it's not a rush $5 to this cause. It's like, let's just be in community with each other and refuse, when we get scared, practice courage, refuse to be isolated, and have each other's back. And I think if we do that, we can really do something in this time.
Thank you so much for your message, for your incredible calm through all this and clarity, and for your work.